Survivor by Pauline Kael, published in The New Yorker, December 31st, 1973. Woody Allen appears before us as the battered adolescent, scarred forever, a little too nice and much too threatened to allow himself to be aggressive. He has the city-wise effrontery of a shrimp who began by using language to protect himself, and then discovered that language has a life of its own. The running war between the tame and the surreal, between Woody Allen the frightened nice guy trying to keep the peace, and Woody Allen the wiseacre whose subversive fantasies keep jumping out of his mouth, has been the source of the comedy in his films. Messy, tasteless, and crazily uneven, as the best talking comedies have often been, the last two pictures he directed, Bananas and Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, had wild highs that suggested an erratic comic genius. The tension between his insecurity and his wit makes us empathize with him. We too are scared to show how smart we feel. And he has found a non-aggressive way of dealing with urban pressures. He stays nice. He's not insulting, like most New York comedians, and he delivers his zingers without turning into a cynic. We enjoy his show of defenselessness, and even the I don't mean any harm ploy, because we see the essential sanity in him. We respect that sanity. It's the base from which he takes flight. At his top, in parts of Bananas and Sex, the inexplicably funny took over. It might be grotesque. It almost always had the flippant, corny bawdiness of a frustrated sophomore running amok. But it seemed to burst out, as the most inspired comedy does, as if we had all been repressing it. We laughed as if he had let out what we couldn't hold in any longer. The surreal is itself tamed in Woody Allen's Sleeper, the most stable and most sustained of his films. It also has the best title. Easily the slapstick comedy of the year, there hasn't been any other, Sleeper holds together, as his sharpest earlier films failed to do. It doesn't sputter and blow fuses, like Bananas and Sex. It's charming, a very even work, with almost no thudding bad lines, and with no low stretches. I can't think of anything much the matter with it. It's a small classic. But it doesn't have the loose, manic highs of those other films. You come out smiling and perfectly happy, but not driven crazy, not really turned on, the way his messier movies and some musicals, Singing in the Rain, Cabaret, and some comic movies, MASH, The Long Goodbye, and parts of Paul Mazursky's movies can turn one on. I had a wonderful time at Sleeper, and I laughed all the way through, but it wasn't exhilarating. Allen's new sense of control over the medium and over his own material seems to level out the abrasive energy. You can be with it all the way, and yet it doesn't impose itself on your imagination. It dissolves when it's finished. If it sounds like a contradiction to say that Sleeper is a small classic and yet not exhilarating, well, I can't completely explain that. Comedy is impossibly mysterious. This is a beautiful little piece of work. It shows a development of skills in our finest comedy maker, and yet it's mild and doesn't quite take off. Woody Allen plays a Rip Van Winkle who wakes up in 2173, and that's all I'm going to say about the story because I don't want to squeeze the freshness out of the jokes. His girl is Diane Keaton, who was practically the only good thing in Play It Again, Sam, and she has a plucky, almost Jean Arthur quality. She's very appealing, and in Sleeper you want to like her. I always felt right on the verge of responding to her, as a broad-faced, Slavic-looking poet of the future, but she isn't quite funny enough. She has good bits, like her Brando parody, but her timing is indefinite, and so is the character she plays. She's really just there to be Woody's girl, and there's nobody else, other than Allen himself, you remember from the movie. Sleeper could really use a cast. In a Preston Sturges comedy, the various characters' madnesses and obsessions bounced off each other and got all scrambled up. Chaplin and Keaton had their big fellows to contend with. The Marx Brothers had each other, plus Margaret Dumont and Walter Wolf King and Sig Rumman, and those blondes wriggling in satin. But Woody Allen has no set characters to respond to. He needs a great stock company, like Carol Burnett's, who wants to be crazy alone that leads to melancholy. But so far in his movies, he's the only character, because his conception of himself keeps him alone. The Woody Allen character suffers, in all his films, from sex in the head, which he figures his body can't get for him. It's the comedy of sexual inadequacy. What makes it hip rather than masochistic and awful is that he thinks women want the media macho ideal, and we in the audience are cued to suspect, as he secretly does, that that's the real inadequacy, social even more than sexual. Woody Allen is a closet case of potency. He knows he's potent, but he's afraid to tell the world, and adolescents and post-adolescents can certainly identify with that. His shrimp hero's worst fear may be that he would be attractive only to women who feel sorry for him or want to dominate him. The latter is parenthetical because Allen hasn't explored that possibility. The thought of him with, say, Anne Bancroft suggests the sort of gambit he hasn't tried. When we see his films, all our emotions attach to him. His fear and his frailty are what everything revolves around. No one else in his pictures has a vivid presence, or any particular quality except being a threat to him, and even that quality isn't really characterized. Maybe the reason he doesn't invest others with comic character, or even villainous character, is that he's so hung up that he has no interest in other people's hang-ups. That could be why his stories never really build to the big climatic finish one expects from a comedy. His plots don't tie a gigantic knot and then explode it, because the other characters aren't strong enough to carry the threads. The end of Sleeper is just a mild cutoff point. Not bad, but unexciting. The movie has a more conventional slapstick comedy structure than Bananas, and slapstick isn't something you can do with a pickup cast. The comedy isn't forced, it looks relaxed and easy, but the routines don't gather momentum, they slide off somewhere. Woody Allen loses his supporting players along the way, and one hardly notices. It's likely that he sees his function as being all of us. But since he's all of us, nobody else can be anything. But being all of us, he can get too evenly balanced. He can lose his edge. Nobody else could have made Bananas, or Parts of Sex, but others could conceivably make a movie like Sleeper, just as others are beginning to write in the Woody Allen manner, and one of the most gifted of them, Marshall Brickman, is co-author of the Sleeper script. The humor here doesn't tap the mother lode, it's strip mining. The movie is in the Woody Allen style, but it doesn't have the disruptive inspiration that is the unbalanced soul of Woody Allen. In interviews, Allen has often been quoted as saying that he wants to stay rough in his movie technique. I used to enjoy reading these quotes because I thought he was right, and in Bananas, his instinct to let the jokes run shapelessly loose instead of trimming them and making them tidy paid off. The effect was berserk in an original way. But he tailored his play Play It Again, Sam, in the smooth George S. Kaufman Broadway style, and the movie version which Herbert Ross directed even more smoothly, I hated it, turned out to be Woody Allen's biggest box office success up to that time, and made him a mass audience star. How could a man who really trusted the free and messy take up the clarinet, an instrument that appeals to controlled, precise people? You can't really goof around with a clarinet. The group he plays with, the New Orleans Funeral and Ragtime Orchestra, can be heard on the sleeper track, along with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. I think he knows that the free and messy is the right great direction for his comedy, but he's very well organized, and, like most comedians, he really trusts success. He trusts laughs, and how can a comedian tell when they're not earned? He's a romantic comedian. He goes on believing in love and the simple good things in life. He's also a very practical man comedian. He's the harried, bespectacled, nice guy who just wants to stay nice and be a success and get the girl. In terms of aspirations, he's rather like Truffaut's Antoine Doinel, the unpretentious, hopeful joiner of the bourgeoisie, as a jester. In American terms, he's Harold Lloyd with Groucho's tongue. To have found a clean visual style for a modern slapstick comedy in color is a major victory. Woody Allen learns with the speed of a wizard. Sleeper has a real look to it, and simple, elegant design. The robot servants of the future, in their tuxedos, might be wind-up dandies by Ellie Nadelman. Physically, Woody Allen is much more graceful in Sleeper. He's turning into that rarity, a verbal comedian who also knows how to use his body. And his acting has developed. He can register more emotions now, and his new, silly, beatific look, the look of a foolish sage, goes with the wonderful infantile jokes that don't make sense. But one might say that Sleeper is a sober comedy. It doesn't unhinge us. We never feel that our reason is being shredded. It has a businesslike, 9-to-5 look to it, and a faint 9-to-5 lethargy. For a comedian, the price of stability may be the loss of inspiration. Our most inspired comedian, Jonathan Winters, has never found his forms. But then he doesn't have that base of sanity either. What's missing is the wild man's indifference to everything but the joke. In Woody Allen's case, this out-of-control edge went way past Groucho's effrontery and W.C. Field's malice into a metaphysical outrageousness. But the impulse was similar. Finally, the pleasure in the joke was all that mattered. That's what put him among the great ones. Woody Allen has become our folk hero because we felt that if we stuck with him, failure could succeed. This was, in a sense, his pact with us to get our loyalty, and it worked. We don't want to have to go through failure. We want to watch him go through it, and come out the other side. I always thought the danger for him was that he wanted to be a universal little fellow, a chaplain, and that he might linger too long on the depressive misfit side of his character, and let the schleppy pathos take over, as he did in Take the Money and Run. And I thought that if he ever convinced us that he was really failing, he'd lose us. Who wants to watch a wispy schlepped? He may not fully know it, but he doesn't need our sympathy. He's got much more than that already. What Woody Allen probably doesn't realize is that when he uses his wit, he becomes our D'Artagnan. He isn't a little fellow for college students. He's a hero. They want to be funny, like him. What I had underestimated was another danger. Woody Allen tips the scales towards winning in Sleeper all right, but he overvalues normality. The battered adolescent still thinks that that's the secret of happiness. He hasn't come to terms with what his wit is telling him. He's dumped Chaplin, blessings, and devised a Buster Keaton-style story, but Keaton's refined physical movements were a clown's poetry, while when Allen does physical comedy, even when he's good at it, he's a very ordinary person. His gift is upstairs. It's really lucky that he cares about himself as much as he does, or he might get so balanced out that his jokes would become monotonous, like those of his imitators. If only he can begin to take control for granted, now that he's improving as a physical comedian and gaining infinitely greater skill as a director. Surreal comedy is chaos. To be really funny, you have to be willing to let your unconscious take over. That's what doesn't happen in Sleeper. The Sting, with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, strings together the chapters of a Saturday afternoon serial, each with its own cliffhanger. And we're invited to wait around and see what the happy twosome will do next. The happy twosome seem to have something for each other, and for most of the rest of the world that I don't tune into. They're fine as actors on the occasions when they practice their profession, but I don't respond to their arch love games, as in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and this new one in which they've swapped mustaches. Newman now has the dashing ornament. They were daring desperados in their last match, now they're hearty hoods. I would much rather see a picture about two homosexual men in love than see two romantic actors going through a routine whose point is that they're so adorably smiley butch that they can pretend to be in love, and it's all innocent. It was more fun in the 40s and 50s, when male couples played these games and we guessed from the way they looked at each other that they really were lovers off-screen. Newman and Redford are probably the two sexiest male stars in the country, but when they play boyish coquettes, the show is cloying, and the absence of women really is felt as a lack in this movie. The device of giving the heroes unimportant women characters for bedmates just calls attention to where the true box office feeling is. But then not only is half of humanity omitted, so is most of what engages the remaining half. The Sting, which is about big-time card sharps and swindlers, is meant to be a roguishly charming entertainment, and I guess that's how most of the audience takes it. But I found it visually claustrophobic and totally mechanical. It keeps cranking on section after section, and it doesn't have a good spirit. As for its hero's vaunted charm, isn't it a little late in life for Robert Redford, who has turned almost alarmingly blonde? He's gone past platinum. He must be into plutonium. His hair is coordinated with his teeth. To be playing a raw kid, a novice con artist. And isn't it a little early in life for Paul Newman to be playing an old pro trickster coming out of retirement for one last score? It's the acting profession that Newman seems to be prematurely retiring from. He looks almost obscenely healthy, as if he never missed his 10 hours of sleep a night. And what would be keeping him up? He and Redford let their cute 30s hats do their work for them. The only lines in Paul Newman's face are those exquisitely happy crinkles around his eyes. He's beginning to look fatuously happy. The setting is the ragtime 30s, a synthetic period compounded of Scott Japlin's rags, Joplin died in 1917, and 30s gangster films. And the director is, once again, the impeccably impersonal George Roy Hill. The script, by David S. Ward, Steelyard Blues, is a collection of Damon Runyon hand-me-downs with the flavor gone. Robert Shaw plays the sullen, stiff-necked menace with a brogue and some bullying force, but the whole movie is full of crooks as sweeties. The Sting is for people, and no doubt there are quantities of them, who like crooks as sweeties. At a cost of $8,150,000, The Day of the Dolphin, directed by Mike Nichols, is the most expensive Rin Tin Tin picture ever made. Actually, it's somewhat more primitive than the Rin Tin Tin pictures. The dog had a marvelous understanding of English, but he was not required to speak it, like the dolphins here. Trained by their loving master, George C. Scott, Alpha and Beta not only learn to prattle in English, but when they are kidnapped by bad men, and a bomb is placed around Beta's head to be delivered to the President of the United States, they foil the assassination attempt, just like Rin Tin Tin with those sticks of dynamite. The movie exploits Watergate and the assassinations for a despairing attitude toward corruption and a resigned anger against the crude villains who care about dolphins only because of their capacity for delivering the explosives. But what of the corruption of this picture, which can think of no way to interest us in dolphins, except by dubbing them with plaintive childish voices and turning them into fishy human babies full of love for Pa? George C. Scott. His conversations with them are worthy of Tarzan and Jane. Scott is, however, made out to be a scientific Big Daddy Superman, whose research institute falls apart when he's not there. An analogy for Mike Nichols? Buck Henry, who wrote the script from the Robert Merle novel, and the others connected with this movie, have a lot to answer for. NBC has already paid $2 million for the right to show the film on TV in 3 years. This picture will probably upset more children than any other movie since Bambi. The Day of the Dolphin ends with the bawling baby Alpha protesting love for Pa, while Scott tells the pair that he will never see them again and that they must trust no man, and forces the whimpering babies to leave their home forever. It's an ugly-souled, manipulative movie. The movie makers who put out the Rin Tin Tin pictures didn't take everything away from the kids in the audience and send them out destroyed. What kind of people are they who play games like this? The movie is too archaic for adults, and it can be agonizing and finally heartbreaking to children. The drippy message of the picture is, wouldn't you know it, how terrible people are. If only we could be like the dolphins. The message is that we're unworthy of contact with them, and who wants to argue the point? But with its cheaply effective anthropomorphic tear-jerking, it makes us even less worthy. If Mike Nichols and Buck Henry don't have anything better to make movies about than involving English-speaking dolphins in assassination attempts, why don't they stop making movies? A reverential gloom and pathos new movie version of The Glass Menagerie was shown on television on Sunday, December 16th. We've probably all had it with this play, thin but funny and touching at the beginning, and now shop-worn, so its faults make it seem ludicrous. On television, the play was dead. The English director Anthony Harvey, The Lion in Winter, obviously had no grasp of the comedy or the vitality in the Tennessee Williams material. It is possible that a heavy advertising budget and the highly publicized television debut of Katharine Hepburn blinded the press, which praised this truly terrible embarrassment in terms almost as florid as Hepburn's performance. Hepburn is a great actress and has given many fine performances, but she is a preposterously bad actress as Amanda Wingfield. She rattles on in her familiar, girlishly distraught style, and she doesn't make you listen, so you lose the sense of her lines. Amanda is something of a monster, but Hepburn plays her for tender sympathy. Hepburn is so Southern and so actressy and jabbers on so artificially that after a while we don't understand a word she says and don't care that we don't. Sam Waterston has demonstrated his talents elsewhere, but perhaps the director's conception overpowered him here, for he gave us Tom Wingfield's desperation without Tom's resilient saving humor. Lines that might have been ironic became serious and remote. Michael Moriarty showed no understanding that the gentleman caller he was playing was meant to be an earnest, deluded go-getter, and Joanna Miles, physically more solid than the others, and appearing to be more psychologically sound too, was blatantly miscast as the frail, lost-in-dreams Laura. Joanna Miles, who has a cold facility, played Laura with a stony face, as if she were an empty shell utterly devoid of feeling. The Glass Menagerie is no great loss. What I found upsetting about the production was that Katharine Hepburn's performance is like a compendium of the remembered mannerisms of her earlier movies. She's beginning to destroy her early performances for us, since gestures that belonged to her earlier characters, gestures that by now belong to us, are turning up promiscuously. The desecration is painful. Thank you for listening. And do like and subscribe and comment. And then have a nice rest of your day.